Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my world of stocks. Before we start today, just a quick reminder, this video is not to persuade you of any political views. In fact, yesterday I actually released the same exact type of video for Trump stocks, and it has nothing to do with politics. We're just here to look at 5 stocks that I feel can greatly benefit from either presidency based on their different policies. And so today we'll be focusing on ones during a Kamala Harris presidency. So let's not waste any time. Please hit the like button. Don't hit the dislike button just for any political reasons. This video has nothing to do with that, I promise. But thank you for your support, my friends. I really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Oh, and by the way, if you hear any airplane noises in the background, it's because there's an airplane show nearby. It's not happening where you're at. It's just coming through the microphone. But yeah, sorry about that. I'm trying to do the best I can with it. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this now. As you guys know, I kicked off the Trump video yesterday with an energy stock from oil and gas. So this time under Kamala, I'm instead going with a renewables expert in NextEra Energy, ticker symbol NEE, which is actually the largest generator of wind and solar in the entire world, but of course based here in America with operations in 49 different states, offering battery storage, wind, solar, and even nuclear, all of which I feel is going to be really more and more important over time for a couple of giant reasons in particular. One being that Democrats especially have an extremely strong preference towards renewable energy over fossil fuels. And the other is because of how many new emerging markets of the future will rely so incredibly heavily on energy that NextEra will also be able to provide. That being things like electric vehicles, which Democrats also heavily favored during the Biden-Harris administration. They gave out many billions of dollars in subsidies and tax incentives for that exact purpose. But there's also the rise in artificial intelligence, which is something that nobody really wants to talk about, is how much energy is required to actually run large AI operations. And of course, big tech companies also tend to love Democrats. They usually donate almost entirely to them, and I think there's a reason for that, as they'll likely be much friendlier to them when it comes to all of that energy that is going to be needed, which will probably end up requiring nuclear energy too. In fact, I think Google just recently said that they're thinking about using nuclear power for much of their work as well. Well, again, NextEra actually offers nuclear too, so that's a big plus on their side as well. And in total, they estimate that America alone will need another 175 gigawatts of renewable energy and storage capacity through 2026, then increase to another 250 by 2030, which is more than a 40% increase. And then here's the real crazy part, by 2050, it's going to need another 7,000 gigawatts to reach their net zero goals, which is almost entirely an initiative pushed by Democrats. And guys, that would equate to over $4 trillion worth of investment. So NextEra as a leader stands to be really one of the biggest beneficiaries from all of this, as they only produce around 72 gigawatts at the moment. So that's almost like a 100 times increase to their addressable market over time. Now, in terms of the stock price, of course, a lot of the optimism has already been getting priced into this one. So it currently trades near a record high, like so much of the broader market. However, the valuation is actually not as bad as you'd expect, with a PEG ratio that is only slightly higher than the sector. That's because longer term, they're expected to grow their profits substantially. And I think a Kamala Harris administration would likely help with that as well, as she's already campaigned on it, saying in recent appearances that her and Biden invested the largest amount of money in history to combat climate change worldwide, with a plan to spend over $1 trillion over the next 10 years too. And Kamala herself as VP cast a tie-breaking vote to triple renewable energy production in the country through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that includes the largest climate change investment in history. So this is all really part of the reason why I own NextEra stock myself. I just think that the whole kind of climate change movement is going to keep boosting them higher. But there's also 2 more reasons why I like this stock in particular that I also think are very important. Number one, I like that they're a utility, because the rates that they charge can actually benefit from either government regulation or guaranteed contracts, making their earnings more reliable, which in turn also helps them pay a dividend, which is the second thing I like about them, as it's a high growth one with over a 2.4% yield, a reasonable payout ratio, a double-digit growth rate, and nearly 3 decades of consecutive growth. All right, moving on though to stock number 2. Yesterday, I talked about stocks that would benefit from bigger tariffs implemented by Trump if he wins. However, if Kamala wins, I think there's a much lower chance of increased tariffs. In fact, most Democrats and the media always talk about how bad tariffs are, and Kamala herself has even criticized them for contributing to inflation. So, if we have less tariffs, then I think there's several other companies that would benefit greatly from that. The most obvious of which would be Chinese companies that sell worldwide, including to the US, which, by the way, while Trump tends to speak pretty negatively about China, and we literally saw what happened during his presidency where the market was falling a bit in 2018 because he took on China head on, that caused what many refer to as a trade war with China. Well, Kamala and Democrats, they tend to be a bit more lenient towards that country, which would also help Chinese stocks by lowering tensions a bit. And of the different options available, well, I just feel that the overall safest and largest one to consider would be Alibaba, ticker symbol BABA, which is already an incredibly strong business, even without the tariffs and trade war discussion. But even more so, it's been helped during the Biden-Harris years as the relationship with America has gradually improved, with delisting concerns settling down and more approved oversight from the SEC, which I think is part of the reason why you're now seeing many Chinese stocks finally start to rebound, with Alibaba itself rising over 30% this past year. However, from the top, it's still down a whopping 64%, which is a huge drop-off for a company that is by all accounts still on fire, not only being the largest e-commerce leader by gross merchandise volume in the entire world, even ahead of Amazon, which is crazy, but they're also the largest cloud provider in Asia and the third largest worldwide too. Yet their sales are still rising by around a double-digit percentage despite that massive size. And so with the stock continuing to trade 24% and 12% cheaper than the sector on a forward PE and PEG ratio basis respectively, well, I think it's looking pretty attractive here for a Kamala Harris presidency. All right, now for stock number 3, I'm actually going to shift over to electric vehicles. However, I can't go with Tesla here because even though Democrats used to love Elon Musk, these days, after the Twitter acquisition and even the endorsement of Trump, well, Musk is seen much more of a villain to them now. So much so that when Biden and Kamala were in charge and held an EV summit, they refused to invite Tesla despite them being the #1 market share leader. So instead, I'm picking General Motors, ticker symbol GM. And there's a very simple reason why. Now, on the Trump campaign, he said before that he would eliminate EV mandates on day one, and he's even considering getting rid of certain tax subsidies for them too. But Kamala, on the other hand, well, her and Biden have been pouring billions into EVs for years. In fact, not only are there continued tax credits for EV purchases, but in total, the Department of Energy under VP Harris has committed over $15 billion to help auto manufacturers convert their factories into EV-related production, while the White House has also pledged more than $170 billion in EV and battery supply chain investments, with over 20 brand new auto and battery plants being announced since they took office, including, by the way, most recently, $2 billion in grants to companies like General Motors, by the way, for them to expand EV production in key election swing states. Now, it is true that GM is still far behind the likes of something like Tesla when it comes to EVs, but they are quickly growing. In fact, they're already approaching double-digit market share in America with new EV models like the Chevy Blazer, Equinox, Silverado, Cadillac Lyriq, Hummer, and more rolling out nationwide, helping their EV sales skyrocket last quarter by 60% year over year. Part of the reason being, they argue, is that they're able to grow their EV portfolio faster than the market right now because of their wide offerings of different EVs for anyone that wants them, which is something that I've actually always argued about GM myself too, is that they're actually pretty well diversified for just being an automaker, having so many strong brands across regular sedans, trucks, and SUVs. In fact, they're the #1 largest seller of total vehicles, #1 in trucks, and #1 in SUVs. That's even ahead of other giants like Ford, Honda, Toyota, and more. So you basically get this dominant legacy automaker of traditional gas-powered vehicles, but you also get all of these investments into future growth like EVs and even autonomous driving too. And yet the stock is actually not as expensive as you might expect it to be, still being a bit flat over the past decade, with also a dirt cheap valuation that is over 70% cheaper than the sector. Under another Kamala Harris administration, I gotta think that that valuation is going to be looking pretty attractive for GM stock long term. All right, now for stock number 4, I have to warn you guys a little bit now because this is actually going to be an extremely high risk speculative penny stock that I've never covered before on the channel. In fact, it's even too risky for myself. But you know, guys, I tend to throw many of the same stocks at you in my videos, so once in a while, can I just put something on your radar that I think would be really interesting to keep an eye on, especially during a Kamala presidency, and get your opinion on it too? Can we just have a little fun with that once in a while? I think that's okay, and if so, well then, for stock number 4, I want to talk about another EV related company, except this one is specifically for charging EVs, and that is ChargePoint, ticker symbol CHPT. Now, there's several reasons why I've been tracking this one a lot recently, and that's because we often talk about EV makers, but we tend to ignore many of the names responsible for building charging networks and the infrastructure for EVs, which I feel is just as important for their future. In fact, in Kamala's climate-related spending that we talked about earlier, well, she specifically outlined EV charging networks as a primary area of focus. And according to Edmunds, one of the biggest reasons why EV adoption is so slow at the moment, only making up less than 10% of all vehicles in America, is because of the lack of charging infrastructure that worries consumers into buying EVs. So clearly this is an area that needs very large expansion. Well, it just so happens that ChargePoint currently holds the most market share in America at over half the entire level 2 charger market. There is, however, rising competition, which, speaking of, EVgo just landed a guaranteed $1 billion loan from the Department of Energy to build more charging stations, which sent the stock skyrocketing by over 60% in a single day. ChargePoint, on the other hand, has been struggling greatly, given the slow EV adoption that was likely also caused by some of that weak economy where consumers have just not really been willing to pay the high price tag for EVs in these past couple years, and as such they've seen their stock price crumble, losing almost all of its value these past couple years, falling from a high of $46 a share during the pandemic to now only being worth around $1 and being considered a penny stock. But I just gotta say, at that low of a price, I think it does start to get pretty interesting, because I have to imagine that they'd be able to survive and maybe start to turn things around in such an EV-friendly administration, especially if interest rates keep coming down, which is also crucial for an unprofitable company like this, as ChargePoint has been growing their sales by large amounts over the years, but losses just keep stacking up as they try to expand and invest in more growth. Of course, under Trump, my feelings on this one would be very different, especially if he cuts subsidies for EVs and helps ICE vehicle sales instead. But again, under Kamala, well, I just think that this is a super interesting stock here to keep an eye on, that I might even want to gamble a very small amount on myself too, especially if it sinks even lower, but we'll see. All right, now I admit that that last one was too risky to really be throwing at you guys, so I apologize for that. But for stock number 5, we'll finish things off here with a giant, safe company, one of the most profitable in the entire world, and we'll go with Apple, ticker symbol AAPL, which my reasons for this one are also pretty simple. Trump wants more international tariffs. Kamala wants less. Most Apple products are built in China and other countries. So logic would tell us that Apple would perform much better under a Kamala presidency than a Trump one if they can actually get their products built at cheaper prices overseas. Now, Granted, the stock is still trading near a record high, as is often the case with such a strong performer like this, but there are several reasons to still be bullish long term. Number one, they're insanely profitable, doing close to $400 billion in sales and $100 billion in profits. Number two, they're finding new ways to convince customers to upgrade their products, the most recent of which is integrating new AI features across the board, which seems to be working, as analysts are projecting around double-digit growth for both their already massive sales and profits over the next 5 years on average. Number three, they still have more growth levers to pull, like launching folding phones, which I think will sell very well, both folding and flipping. Number four, their higher margin services revenue continues to soar every year, with another quarter of double-digit growth this latest one. Number five, the ecosystem is extremely sticky because of all the different hardware and software that customers get attached to, making it really hard for them to ever switch over to a competitor. Number six, they use that insane profitability to buy back many billions of dollars of their own stock every year, making your shares more valuable, with another $100 billion plan announced this year too, which was the largest amount in history for any company in the entire world. I mean, it's pretty crazy. And number seven, they have also one of the biggest balance sheets out there, with plenty of cash to invest in new growth initiatives whenever they need to. All of which makes this a stock that I think is a pretty good choice, in my opinion, for a Kamala presidency, where really high tariffs shouldn't be much of a concern. But anyway, those are my picks. What do you think? Let me know down below. And if these two videos did well enough, well, the Trump one and this one, I may even consider doing a part 2 for them, where I cover even more Trump and Kamala stocks to consider. Let me know if you want to see that. But thanks again for all your support, my friends. Thank you for stopping by, and wish you the best of luck out there, and I'll catch you in the next video. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.